The Jeep had been sitting there for less than an hour when Obergefreiter Klaus Richter and his maintenance crew arrived. Someone had already spray-painted a crude iron cross on the hood, the usual soldier's joke when capturing enemy equipment. A few riflemen stood nearby, smoking, waiting to see if the mechanics would declare it salvageable or order it destroyed. Richter approached with the confident stride of a man who had diagnosed every mechanical problem the Wehrmacht could throw at him. 23 years old, 5 years in the motor pool. He'd kept Kübelwagens running through sandstorms that choked engines in minutes and repaired half-tracks with nothing but wire and profanity. American vehicles were supposed to be a joke, overweight, overcomplicated, built by a nation that made refrigerators and jazz music but had no understanding of real engineering. "Let's see what these cowboys built," Richter muttered to his crew. They circled the vehicle slowly, noting the battered olive-drab paint, the simple flat panels, the exposed hinges and basic hardware. Everything about it screamed mass production, stamped rather than crafted, assembled rather than engineered. One of the younger mechanics kicked a tire dismissively. "Looks like something a farmer would drive." Richter nodded, pulling out his tools. "We'll strip anything useful and scrap the rest." But when he lifted the hood, the smile froze on his face. The engine compartment was immaculate, not in the sense of cleanliness, though it was surprisingly clean, but in its layout. Every component was accessible. Every wire was color-coded. Every bolt head was the same size. The spark plugs could be reached without removing half the engine. The oil filter sat in plain sight with a simple screw mechanism. Richter had spent years working on German military vehicles where accessing certain components required partial disassembly, specialized tools, and training manuals thicker than a Bible. This engine looked like it had been designed by someone who expected mechanics to work on it in the dark, under fire, with frozen fingers. Before we continue, click that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It brings me great joy knowing that these war stories and lessons get to people all over the world. Your support helps us bring more thrilling war stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get back to the story. "Mein Gott," whispered his assistant, staring at the clearly labeled components. Richter reached for the distributor cap. It twisted off by hand. No tools required. The air filter could be removed in seconds. The entire electrical system was laid out with a logic that made German engineering suddenly seem overcomplicated. "Start it," Richter said quietly. The youngest mechanic climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine caught immediately. Smooth, unremarkable, utterly reliable. Richter stood motionless, listening to that steady idle. This wasn't the sound of American incompetence. This was the sound of a machine designed by people who understood something the Wehrmacht had forgotten. Perfect engineering means nothing if your mechanics can't fix it in a muddy field at midnight. "Take it for a drive," Richter said, his voice flat, "through the soft sand, past the ridge." The young mechanic looked confused. Kübelwagens could barely manage that terrain without getting bogged down. Why waste time proving this heavier American vehicle would fail even worse? But something in Richter's expression stopped the question. 10 minutes later, when the Jeep powered through sand that would have trapped any rear-wheel drive vehicle, climbing, crawling, and moving with a mechanical indifference to terrain, Richter felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood: fear of the unknown. The Americans hadn't just built a vehicle, they'd built a philosophy. And if this crude little Jeep represented how America approached war, then Germany was in far more trouble than anyone had admitted. Richter ordered both vehicles parked side by side in the motor pool the next morning. The Kübelwagen looked exactly as it should. Lean, purposeful, a testament to Ferdinand Porsche's genius. Its sloped body panels minimized weight. The air-cooled engine eliminated vulnerable radiators. The torsion bar suspension was a marvel of sophisticated engineering. Next to it, the Jeep looked brutish and crude, but Richter had stopped trusting appearances. "We're going to compare them," he announced to the assembled mechanics and officers who had gathered to see the captured vehicle. System by system. He started with the drivetrain. The Kübelwagen's rear-wheel drive system was efficient and simple for paved roads. In North African sand, it required constant momentum, careful throttle control, and prayer. Experienced drivers could coax it through difficult terrain, but one mistake meant digging out or calling for recovery. Richter pointed to the Jeep's transfer case. One lever, four-wheel drive engaged. He demonstrated a single smooth pull. "Any idiot can do this in seconds." An officer frowned. "The Kübelwagen has reduction hubs on the rear wheels. It provides better traction on rear wheels only," Richter interrupted, his tone carefully neutral. "The Jeep powers all four wheels. I watched it climb through sand yesterday that would have trapped 3 Kübelwagens." Silence. He moved to the suspension. "Our torsion bars are brilliant engineering. Complex, precise, smooth." He ran his hand along the Kübelwagen's sophisticated system. "But if one breaks in the field, you need specialized parts and trained technicians." He walked to the Jeep and slapped its crude leaf springs. "These are simple, primitive even, but you can repair them with metal strips and basic tools. A blacksmith could fix this. A farmer could fix this." One of the older mechanics spoke up, defensive. "German engineering prioritizes performance and efficiency. We don't overbuild vehicles for conditions that rarely—" "It's not overbuilt," Richter said quietly. "It's built for reality." He opened both hoods. The Kübelwagen's air-cooled engine was a masterpiece. Lightweight, efficient, refined. But its electrical system required specific knowledge. Its carburetor needed adjustment. Its unique components meant specialized training and parts inventory. The Jeep's engine looked agricultural by comparison. "This engine," Richter said, "can be serviced by anyone who has ever worked on a tractor. Every bolt is standard. Every part is interchangeable. The Americans designed this expecting that barely trained conscripts would need to maintain it under combat conditions." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We designed the Kübelwagen for mechanics. The Americans designed the Jeep for soldiers." An officer stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable. "You're suggesting American engineering is superior?" "No, Herr Leutnant," Richter replied. "I'm suggesting it's different. And in this war, their approach may matter more than ours." He gestured at both vehicles. "The Kübelwagen is a finely crafted instrument. The Jeep is a mass-produced tool. We can build 50,000 Kübelwagens with our industrial capacity, trained workforce, and precision manufacturing." He let that hang in the air. "The Americans will build 600,000 Jeeps." The number landed like artillery. "That's not possible," someone muttered. Richter looked at the Jeep, its stamped panels, its simplified systems, its ruthless practicality. "It's not only possible," he said quietly, "it's already happening." The myth of German engineering supremacy didn't shatter with dramatic force. It simply dissolved, replaced by a creeping understanding that precision and quality meant nothing if you couldn't produce enough, fast enough, to matter. The intelligence report arrived 3 days later, stamped with the eagle and swastika of Wehrmacht High Command. Richter read it twice, certain there had been a translation error. There hadn't been. Major Ernst Vogel, a supply officer who had worked at Opel's Rüsselsheim plant before the war, arrived that afternoon to brief the unit's officers and senior NCOs. He carried a leather folder thick with documents and photographs. "Gentlemen," Vogel began, spreading papers across the makeshift table, "what you've discovered with this Jeep is not an isolated phenomenon. It represents something we are observing across every theater of war. He pulled out a production chart. American vehicle manufacturing capacity, 1942 estimates. His finger traced the columns. Jeeps, approximately 640,000 by war's end. Trucks of all types, over 2.5 million. Tanks, 88,000. Half-tracks, scout cars, amphibious vehicles, millions more. Someone laughed nervously. That can't be accurate. Vogel's expression didn't change. These are conservative estimates based on captured documents and aerial reconnaissance of American factories. If anything, they understate reality. He produced a grainy reconnaissance photograph showing an enormous industrial complex. Ford's Willow Run plant in Michigan. One building, one single building, over 3 million square feet. At peak production, it completes a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. The room fell silent. Every hour, Vogel continued, another bomber. 4-engine, heavy payload, fully equipped. That's one factory, gentlemen. The Americans have dozens operating at similar capacity. Richter felt cold despite the desert heat. Vogel wasn't finished. American shipyards are launching Liberty cargo ships, 10,000-ton vessels, in an average of 42 days from keel laying to launch. Some yards have reduced that to under 4 weeks. The Americans are building ships faster than we can sink them. He pulled out another document. German production figures for comparison. Kübelwagens, approximately 50,000 total production through war's end. Opel Blitz trucks, around 100,000. Our entire annual steel production is less than what the Americans dedicate solely to vehicle manufacturing. An officer spoke up, his voice strained. But our equipment is superior. Quality over quantity. Quality is irrelevant, Vogel interrupted, his tone sharp, when you're outnumbered 12-1. He gestured at the Jeep sitting outside. That vehicle represents American industrial philosophy. Simplified, standardized, designed for mass production by semi-skilled workers in converted factories. Every refrigerator plant, every automobile factory, every machine shop, mobilized for war production. Vogel's voice dropped. We are fighting their economy, not just their army. And their economy is larger than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. He let that sink in. The Jeep uses interchangeable parts across 640,000 vehicles. One spare parts supply chain serves the entire fleet. Our Kübelwagens have variations, modifications, specialized components. Our logistics system is a nightmare by comparison. Richter thought about the engine he'd inspected. Every bolt standard, every component identical. They've built a system, Vogel continued, where battlefield losses don't matter because replacement arrives faster than attrition, where mechanical failure is irrelevant because repairs require minimal training and common tools. He closed his folder. Gentlemen, we are not losing this war because of tactics or courage. We are losing because of mathematics. Industrial mathematics that no amount of German engineering excellence can overcome. The briefing ended. No one spoke as they filed out. Richter stood alone, staring at the Jeep. It wasn't a vehicle anymore. It was a verdict. Tunisia, May 13, 1943. Richter surrendered with the rest of the Africa Corps when the Axis position became untenable. Over 250,000 German and Italian soldiers laid down their weapons. The war for them was over, but the education was just beginning. The American MP who processed Richter's intake forms noticed his occupation listed as motor pool mechanic. "You any good?" the American asked in broken German. Richter shrugged. What did it matter now? 2 days later, he was assigned to a prisoner work detail at a U.S. Army motor pool outside Tunis. 50 German mechanics, organized under guard to help maintain the massive vehicle fleet supporting Allied operations in the Mediterranean. What Richter saw in that motor pool shattered whatever illusions Tunisia hadn't already destroyed. Rows of vehicles stretched beyond sight. Jeeps, trucks, half-tracks, tank transporters, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. And these were just the ones awaiting routine maintenance. An American sergeant, a stocky man from Ohio named Patterson, supervised the German work crews. "You know engines?" Patterson asked Richter through a translator. "Yes." "Good. That Jeep over there threw a rod. Replace the engine." Richter blinked. "Replace the entire engine?" "Yeah. Why, you Germans rebuild them or something?" "We? Yes. Disassemble, machine new parts, reassemble." Patterson laughed. "Jesus, no wonder you lost." He gestured to a warehouse. "Crated engines, pre-assembled and tested. Unbolt the old one, bolt in the new one. 2 men, 4 hours, basic tools. The broken engine goes back to a depot for rebuild. Someone else's problem." Richter stared at him. "You just replace it? It's faster than fixing it. We got warehouses full of spare engines, transmissions, axles, everything. Why waste time rebuilding when you can swap and get the vehicle back in service?" Over the following weeks, Richter witnessed an industrial logistics system that operated on principles alien to German military doctrine. American supply convoys arrived daily. Massive truck columns carrying parts, fuel, ammunition, food. Everything was standardized, cataloged, cross-referenced. A requisition form filed in the morning produced parts by afternoon. One day, a transmission failed on a Dodge truck. The American mechanics didn't even attempt repair. "That's a W-series transmission," one explained to the watching Germans. "We got 50 spares in the warehouse. Pull the old one, drop in a new one. Paperwork says we send the broken one back stateside for rebuild." "Stateside?" Richter asked. "You ship broken transmissions across the Atlantic?" "Sure. Got factories full of people who do nothing but rebuild components. By the time this one gets repaired and shipped back, it'll go into another truck somewhere else." The system was circular, infinite, self-sustaining. German logistics relied on field repairs because replacement parts were scarce, production was limited, and every vehicle was precious. American logistics assumed battlefield damage and simply rotated stock. Patterson noticed Richter's expression one afternoon. "You're starting to get it, aren't you?" "Get what?" "Why you lost." Patterson lit a cigarette. "It's not because our tanks were better or our soldiers were tougher. It's because we could lose 100 vehicles on Monday and replace them by Friday. You lose 10 and spend a month scrounging parts to fix them." He gestured at the endless rows of equipment. "This isn't even our main supply depot. This is a forward motor pool. We got 3 more like this just in Tunisia. And back home?" He laughed. "Factories running 24 hours. Assembly lines that never stop. We're building this stuff faster than you can destroy it." Richter understood then, truly understood, what the Jeep had been trying to tell him back in 1942. America hadn't just mobilized an army. It had mobilized an industrial reality that made conventional warfare obsolete. Quality, precision, craftsmanship, all irrelevant when facing a system designed for abundance. Patterson started treating the German mechanics less like prisoners and more like students. "You guys are good," he admitted one afternoon, watching Richter diagnose a cylinder misfire by sound alone. "Real good, but you're thinking about this all wrong." He pulled Richter aside during a break, spreading a Jeep maintenance manual on the workbench. "Look at this. 70 pages. Pictures on every page. Written for guys who maybe finished 8th grade. A farm kid from Kansas can learn to service this entire vehicle in a week." Richter flipped through the manual. Simple diagrams, step-by-step instructions, standardized procedures. Nothing like the dense technical documents German mechanics studied for months. "Your Kübelwagens," Patterson continued, "I've seen the manuals. 200 pages, technical German, assumes the reader knows engineering principles. That's fine for peacetime mechanics, but in war? He tapped the Jeep manual. We need every soldier to be a mechanic, so we built vehicles any soldier can maintain. Over the following months, Patterson shared the philosophy that guided American military vehicle design: simplicity over sophistication. This carburetor, Patterson explained, disassembling a Jeep's fuel system, is crude as hell. A German engineer would laugh at it. But you know what? It works at sea level, at altitude, in deserts, in snow. No adjustment needed. We sacrificed optimal performance for operational reliability. Standardization over customization. See these bolts? Patterson held up a handful. Same thread, same head size, used in 40 different places on this vehicle. You only need 3 wrenches to disassemble the entire Jeep. How many tools you need for a Kübelwagen? Richter didn't answer. They both knew it was over 20. Abundance over preservation. You Germans treat every vehicle like it's precious, Patterson observed. Spend hours rebuilding a fuel pump to save one part. We don't have time for that. Swap it. Move on. The replacement is already in the supply chain. One afternoon, a young German mechanic, barely 19, asked the question they'd all been thinking. But doesn't this waste resources? All this replacement instead of repair? Patterson considered this. Maybe, but here's what you're missing. Time is a resource too. The most important one. He gestured at the motor pool. That Jeep you spent 6 hours rebuilding the engine on? We would have swapped the engine in 2 hours and had it back in service. Those 4 extra hours mean another mission completed, another supply run, another advantage. He looked at the German mechanics. You're thinking like craftsmen. We're thinking like a production line. And in total war, the production line wins. Richter began to see American military doctrine differently. Not as crude or wasteful, but as a coherent philosophy built around industrial reality. Every decision optimized for speed of repair, ease of training, supply chain simplification, maximum operational availability. The Germans had built vehicles for peacetime logic: efficiency, performance, minimal material waste. The Americans had built vehicles for wartime logic: maximum uptime, minimum skill required, infinite replacement capacity. Your engineers are artists, Patterson said one evening. Ours are factory foremen. You built masterpieces. We built systems. He lit a cigarette, smoke curling in the Mediterranean dusk. In peacetime, I'd take a Kübelwagen over a Jeep any day. Beautiful machine. But in war? He shook his head. War doesn't care about beautiful. War cares about enough. Richter watched American trucks rolling past. Dozens of them. Identical, interchangeable, endless. Patterson was right. Germany had built vehicles. America had built an ecosystem. And ecosystems always outlasted masterpieces. The conversation happened in late 1944, after the Allies had broken out of Normandy. Richter and a dozen other German mechanics sat in the motor pool's brake area, listening to Patterson explain why the war had been lost before it truly began. You want to know the real reason? Patterson asked, crushing out his cigarette. It's not because American soldiers were better. It's not because our generals were smarter. Hell, you guys had some of the best tactical commanders in the world. He pulled out a notepad and started writing numbers. It's because of this. He wrote, 640,000 Jeeps. That's just one vehicle type. Now add 2.5 million trucks, 88,000 tanks, 300,000 aircraft, 2,700 Liberty ships. And that's just America. Add British and Soviet production. You see where this goes? One of the older German mechanics spoke up. We knew you had production capacity, but we had superior technology. Did you? Patterson interrupted. Your Tiger tank was incredible. Absolutely incredible. But you know what beats one Tiger tank? He didn't wait for an answer. 5 Sherman tanks. And we could build 5 Shermans in the time it took you to build one Tiger. Do the math. The mathematics were brutal. Patterson continued. Your Me-262 jet fighter was years ahead of anything we had. Absolutely revolutionary. But you built, what, 1,400 of them? We built 12,000 P-51 Mustangs. Which fleet controls the airspace? Richter understood, but understanding didn't make it easier to accept. It's not about individual quality, Patterson said. It's about aggregate capability. You had the world's best engineers designing the world's most sophisticated weapons. But sophisticated means slow to produce, difficult to maintain, impossible to replace. He gestured at the American vehicles surrounding them. Everything we built was designed around one question. Can we make enough of them, fast enough, to overwhelm the enemy? Not, is it perfect? Not, is it elegant? Just, is it sufficient? And can we build 10,000 of them? A young mechanic asked quietly, so quality doesn't matter? Quality matters, Patterson corrected, but only to a point. A weapon that's 80% as good, but available in unlimited quantities, beats a perfect weapon you can't produce fast enough. He pulled out a logistics report. Look at this. Normandy invasion. We landed with 5,000 vehicles in the first wave. 5,000. By the end of the first month, we had over 100,000 vehicles in France. Your entire motorized force on the Western Front was maybe 50 vehicles, and half of those were broken down waiting for parts. The silence was heavy. You lost, Patterson said, not unkindly, because you were playing a different game than we were. You were trying to build the best army. We were trying to build the biggest army that was good enough. He stood up, looking at the German mechanics. Your Tiger tanks and Me-262s and V-2 rockets? Impressive as hell. But they were engineering solutions to industrial problems. You needed factories, not better designs. You needed production lines, not technical superiority. Richter stared at his hands that had maintained precision German vehicles for years, believing that excellence mattered above all else. The Jeep tried to tell you in 1942, Patterson said softly. Simple, mass-producible, good enough. That was the future of warfare, and you couldn't accept it. He was right. Germany had lost the war in Detroit and Pittsburgh and Willow Run. The battles in North Africa and Normandy and Berlin were just the confirmation of an industrial verdict already rendered. Germany, 1947, Richter returned to a country that barely existed anymore. The cities were rubble. The factories were ruins or stripped by the Allies for reparations. The economy had collapsed. Millions were homeless, starving, trying to survive in the wreckage of the Third Reich. But Richter had returned with something more valuable than the few possessions in his duffel bag. He had returned with knowledge. The American motor pools had taught him principles that Germany's engineering schools had never considered. Not because German engineers were inferior, but because they'd been asking the wrong questions. In a bombed-out machine shop in Stuttgart, Richter found work with a man named Friedrich Weber, a former Daimler-Benz engineer who was attempting to restart automotive production with salvaged equipment and desperate workers. We need to build vehicles, Weber explained. The country needs transportation, but we have no materials, limited tools, and workers who are half-starved. Richter nodded slowly. Then we build like the Americans did. Weber frowned. Crude vehicles? That's not the German way. No, Richter interrupted. We build vehicles designed for the reality we face, not for the Germany that existed in 1939, for this Germany. He explained what he'd learned. Simplicity, standardization, ease of repair, design for manufacturability. We don't have time to engineer perfection, Richter said. We need vehicles that work. that our workers can build with limited skills, that owners can maintain with basic tools. Weber was skeptical until he saw the drawings. Richter had designed a simple truck. Fewer parts than traditional German designs. Standardized components, interchangeable systems. Every decision optimized for ease of production and field maintenance. Weber studied the plans. This is revolutionary and practical. It's American philosophy applied with German precision, Richter said. They built the first prototype in 3 months, a timeline that would have been impossible with traditional German engineering methods. The vehicle wasn't beautiful, it wasn't sophisticated, but it worked, and more importantly, it could be maintained by farmers and shop owners with minimal training. Word spread through Germany's recovering industrial sector. Other mechanics and engineers who had been prisoners in American camps were returning with similar ideas. They had seen the American production philosophy up close and understood its power. The automotive industry that rebuilt in post-war Germany was different from what had existed before. It blended German engineering precision with American production philosophy. Quality control remained rigorous, but designs prioritized manufacturability. Vehicles were sophisticated but maintainable. Performance was excellent, but not at the expense of reliability. By the 1950s, the Volkswagen Beetle, designed before the war but refined afterward, became a global phenomenon. Simple, reliable, easy to maintain. German quality meeting American production principles. Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Porsche, all rebuilt with new philosophies that balanced engineering excellence with practical reality. Richter never became famous. His name didn't appear in automotive history books. But in a small Stuttgart factory, he trained a generation of engineers and designers who understood what the Jeep had taught him. Engineering serves reality, not ego. One evening in 1956, Richter saw a Jeep parked outside an American military installation in Frankfurt. Newer model, updated features, but fundamentally the same vehicle he'd inspected in the North African desert 14 years earlier. He stood there for a long moment, remembering. That Jeep had destroyed his faith in German supremacy, but it had also given him something more valuable: understanding. Wars were won by industrial reality, and Germany's post-war miracle was built on lessons learned from a simple American vehicle that had been designed not for perfection, but for enough. Stuttgart, 1982. The reunion was small, just 17 men, all in their 60s now, all former Wehrmacht mechanics who had served in North Africa. They met in a modest restaurant, drinking beer and sharing memories that had softened with time. Wars that had seemed apocalyptic in youth now felt like strange dreams from another lifetime. Richter, now 71 and retired, sat at the head of the table. His hands trembled slightly, age, not fear, as he raised his glass. "To absent friends," he said quietly. They drank. The conversation wandered through old memories: the desert heat, the flies, the terrible food, the camaraderie that existed even in defeat. War stories, sanitized and safe, the kind old men tell when the trauma has been processed and filed away. Then someone mentioned the Jeep. The table fell quiet. "I think about it sometimes," said Franz Keller, who had been Richter's assistant back in 1942. "That day we first opened the hood. I knew right then. I didn't want to know, but I knew." Another veteran nodded. "We all knew. We just couldn't say it." "Say what?" asked a younger man at the next table. Someone's grandson, listening politely to old men's talk. Richter turned to him. "That we had already lost the war." The young man looked confused. "But this was 1942? The war went on for 3 more years. The fighting went on," Richter corrected gently. "But the war? The war was decided in American factories. We were just too stubborn, or too stupid, to accept it." Werner Dietrich, who had survived Stalingrad before his capture in Tunisia, spoke up. I saw the best German soldiers in the world freeze to death waiting for supplies that never came. Meanwhile, the Americans were drowning in equipment, drowning in it. The Jeep showed us, Keller said. It was like seeing a shadow on the wall and realizing it was cast by something enormous behind you. What do you mean? The grandson asked. Richter thought about how to explain it. That Jeep represented a philosophy we couldn't match. Every bolt identical, every part interchangeable, designed so that anyone could maintain it. And they built 640,000 of them. He paused. We built 50,000 Kübelwagens, beautiful machines, sophisticated, but 12 times fewer. The Jeep wasn't better than our vehicles, Dietrich added. That's what people don't understand. In a one-to-one comparison, the Kübelwagen was probably superior in some ways. But the Jeep could be everywhere, and everywhere beats better. An old mechanic named Hans Schmidt, who rarely spoke, cleared his throat. I worked on German vehicles my whole life before the war. Precision machines. Works of art, really. Then I saw that American engine bay, and I thought, these people understand something we don't. What was that? The grandson asked. That war isn't won by the best soldiers or the best weapons, Schmidt said. It's won by enough soldiers and enough weapons arriving fast enough. Richter nodded slowly. The Jeep was our teacher. It taught us humility. And it taught us how to rebuild, Keller added. After the war, when we came back to nothing, we remembered those lessons. Simplicity, reliability, design for reality, not theory. The German economic miracle, Richter said to the grandson, was built partly on American principles we learned as prisoners. We blended their production philosophy with our engineering precision. The table was quiet for a moment. We lost the war, Richter finally said. But that Jeep, that crude, simple, brilliant machine, helped us win the peace. They raised their glasses again, not to victory, not to defeat, to understanding. The Jeep never stopped production. 70 years after Richter first opened that hood in the North African desert, variations of the vehicle were still being manufactured, still serving military and civilian roles across the globe. But the Jeep's real legacy wasn't the vehicle itself. It was the philosophy it embodied. That philosophy reshaped the world. In post-war Germany, the lessons learned from American industrial methods merged with traditional German engineering excellence to create a new automotive culture. Vehicles that were sophisticated yet maintainable, complex yet reliable, precision-built yet designed for mass production. The Volkswagen Beetle sold over 21 million units by 2003, becoming the best-selling car in history precisely because it followed the Jeep's principles. Simple, reliable, maintainable by owners with basic tools. Mercedes-Benz built its reputation on vehicles that combined German quality with American-inspired serviceability. BMW's motorcycles and cars became legendary not just for performance, but for dependability. Japanese manufacturers studied both traditions, German precision and American mass production, and synthesized them into the Toyota production system. Lean manufacturing, just-in-time delivery, continuous improvement. The Jeep's ghost haunted every assembly line in Nagoya and Yokohama. By the 1980s, Korean manufacturers followed the same path. The principles that shocked Wehrmacht mechanics in 1942 had become global standard practice. Standardization reduces complexity. Simplicity enables reliability. Design for manufacturability, not just performance. Ease of maintenance matters as much as initial quality. In 2012, a German automotive engineer named Thomas Richter, Klaus Richter's grandson, stood in the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, staring at a restored 1942 Willys MB. He had heard the family stories. His grandfather had told them repeatedly in his final years, always returning to that moment in the desert when everything changed. Thomas walked around the vehicle slowly, noting details his grandfather had described. The color-coded wires, the accessible components, the standardized bolts. A museum docent approached. "Interesting vehicle, isn't it? Over 640,000 built during the war. Served on every front. Probably the most important vehicle of World War II." Thomas nodded. "My grandfather was a Wehrmacht mechanic. He inspected one of these in North Africa in 1942. What did he think?" Thomas smiled sadly. "He said it showed him the future, and that Germany was living in the past." The docent looked curious. Did that change how he thought about engineering? "It changed how an entire generation thought about engineering," Thomas replied. After the war, he helped rebuild Germany's automotive industry using principles he learned from this vehicle. Simplicity, reliability, design for the real world, not the theoretical one. He paused, looking at the Jeep. "My grandfather used to say that Germany lost the war in 1942 the moment he opened this hood. But he also said Germany won the peace by learning what this vehicle had to teach." The Jeep sat there, preserved and perfect, a museum piece from a war that ended decades ago. But its legacy wasn't frozen in history. It was present in every assembly line that prioritized manufacturability over complexity. In every vehicle designed for owners to maintain, not just technicians to repair. In every engineer who understood that perfect is the enemy of good enough. The Jeep had been built for war, crude, simple, effective. But it had taught the world how to build for peace. Klaus Richter died in 1989, just months before the Berlin Wall fell. His final words to his grandson were about that day in the desert. "That Jeep saved my life," he whispered. "Not because I drove it, but because it taught me that reality always defeats theory. Remember that, Thomas, always." Thomas Richter remembered, and so did the world the Jeep had reshaped.